Hi sweet all, it's France. Welcome for this week 80 of the Journal on Monday series, and today I will be working almost exclusively with the Inktense blocks, as this is the winner of our poll from last week. The first thing I'm doing is that I'm scraping a piece of Inktense block on the scratcher so that I can add water to it and blend it completely to the water, and now I have some kind of watercolor ink. The difference with watercolor ink is that this one will dry completely permanent, so I will be able to go back over it with whatever it is I want to use on top of it, and it will not move or be contaminated by any other color. For this first background layer, I'm trying to create a gradient going from light to darker, and I'm also playing with several techniques that you can do with the Inktense blocks. So the first one was a diluted one, and the second one in the middle I applied Derwent Inktense block dry on the paper and then added some water to it, some colorized water. For the third one, I'm applying the Inktense block on my paper when it's already wet, and I'm doing the same thing for the last piece, but I'm insisting a bit more so that the color is even darker. So I'm pressing the block harder on the paper, and now I'm playing around with water to blend everything. And that's the fun thing with this one. You can really create a complete range of intensity varieties. Now I'm drying this one first so that it becomes permanent, and now I'm adding some more shading where I want to. As long as the Inktense hasn't been blended with water, it stays reactive. So that's why I'm insisting here, because I realized that I had quite some Inktense on the little crevices of the paper that didn't react to the water yet. And then I'm just playing around until I have the gradient that I want. And I'm heat setting it so that it becomes permanent again. As I have some ink left over, I'm just playing around with it, adding some splatters and some drippage. I know this won't be visible anymore when I'm done with my spread, but that's okay. I'm just having fun with what I have. Now I have quite some of this gauze left over from one of my latest surgeries, so I thought, well, let's have some fun with those. The difference between gauze and cambric is that the cambric is less fragile than the gauze, and the little squares are more regular on cambric than they are on gauze. So I sprayed some water on top of them, and now I'm just rubbing an Inktense block on top, just playing around with the colors. And then I'm spraying some more water to blend the Inktense in the fabric. Now, as I want to create a gradient again, I'm placing a second gauze on top and picking up some of the excess ink, so that I have a lighter version of the first one, adding some more color and water, and then again the same, picking up some excess ink with the next piece of gauze. I think I colorized 6 or 7 in total in this way. As my darkest one wasn't dark enough to my liking, I made a darker one. And Barb, I think this should answer your question with color. You asked me to work with some colors, so I think this should answer your question. The camera is making those colors look quite dull, but they're actually quite vibrant. And then I have to dry everything, and this could be another fun way to create a nicely colorized piece of tissue roll. And then heat setting it again. So I have my gradient, I have a scrap piece of paper that I picked out, and now I want to add some stamping, and to do so I'm spraying water on my craft sheet, rubbing an Inktense block in it, and then rubbing the Inktense block on my stamp so that I can use the ink to stamp. And as long as it hasn't dried, these colors will blend together, so you could create quite some fun colorized stamping using this technique. Here I'm only using two shades of brown, but you could use, well, all kinds of colors and blend them together. And then again, heat setting it so that it becomes permanent. At this point, I could glue down my strips of fabric. And I'm just doing so with tacky glue because I know I will secure everything with some sewing. Fairy Girl asked me on my blog if I ever worked on two separate pages in my art journal with the binding ring as separation. I don't. I always work on one piece and then cut it in half because I wanted to look like one piece. Quickly giving it a blow with the heat gun and then going in to sew everything together. Of course, I will keep these leftovers to use on another spread. They're way too fun to throw out. And I'm pulling on the gauze so that it looks more tethered and not too neat. So I picked out some embellishments that I wanted to use, and then I decided to go over the fabric with some modeling paste. So this spread is based on the Inktense block, which was the big winner of the poll on my blog from last week. If you would like to have a saying in what I will be using in next week's video, well, you'll have to go over to my blog and cast your vote. It's at the top of the right blog roll. And if you leave a comment here or on my blog or on my Facebook page mentioning a technique or a product, I might include it in a next poll. Then to colorize the modeling paste, again, I'm using the Inktense block in another way. I'm using a wet pencil. You can see a wet brush. Sorry, you can see that I have some water on my craft sheet, and I use the water to dilute the block so that I can use the ink directly on the modeling paste. If my modeling paste surface was bigger, I would have used the Inktense block directly without diluting it on the modeling paste first and then added some water, but the squares were too small. That's my kid's hand who decided to run off with one of my embellishments. So I'm applying a first layer, then drying it, then applying a second layer and playing around with those colors until I have the look that I want. Now, the darker the color, the more careful I use it. At least on this piece. As you can see, I'm only placing a tiny little dot and then blending it with water. This is very relaxing. You can keep going over and over and over it until you have something that you like. Of course, these Inktense blocks were made to be used in fine art, which I cannot do, so I'm using them the way I can. I diluted some Inktense block directly on my craft sheet, and then using my finger I'm applying it on a piece of metal. It will become permanent once dried. When you do so, be careful that your metal gets hot when you heat set it. And then I'm using the leftover, but like I would use distress ink on the edges of my paper. And then doing the same again with a lighter color. So I'm rubbing my Inktense block in the water and then on my craft sheet. This time I'm rubbing the Inktense block in the water, but instead of rubbing it on my craft sheet and applying it with my finger, I'm applying it directly on the paper. And this way the edges, this is a dark brown, it makes the edges look a bit burned. My metal is too big, so I'm cutting it to a smaller size. Adding some more Inktense block. And this is a piece of rusted metal from the stables. I'm adding my word for the new year, which will be reach, and reach in a lot of different meanings. My metal wasn't dark enough to my liking, so I'm adding a darker, very dark brown to it. And again, I changed my mind, so I added some more modeling paste. Now I'm not going to show you again all over how I did it. You saw it in the first time I did it. Just adding a tiny bit of distress ink on my alphabet, my word, and then gluing everything down. In case you're wondering, I have the 24 colors in the Inktense blocks. And I'm stapling the word down to make sure it will stay in place on top of the fabric. To keep my metal in place, I'm using brads. So I'm just sticking the brad through everything, through the metal, the fabric, the paper, and then opening it on the back side to keep everything in place. And then doing the same on the other side. I'm adding some journaling on a scrap piece of paper. This is an old dictionary page that I used to mop up extra ink. And I'm checking that my metal is not going over the middle of my spread, because I won't be able to cut that. My husband had to cut it with some heavy machinery, so I'm just using all kinds of leftovers embellishments on top of this spread. That's why you're not seeing how I'm making them or getting them ready. Gluing my metal down, and this is a piece of grunge paper that has been sewed and colorized, and that's a piece of plaster strip. I really like this button and I really would like to use it somewhere, and I thought it was perfect for this spread, but in the end I took it back off. This is a porcelain heart, one you could see on my Instagram feed when I was making them, and some home rusted washers. Just gluing everything down. This is a Finnavar vintage centerpiece, and as my paper was too big, I just took a piece away. To glue the metallic ring, this is made with annealed iron. I just turned some metal together. I'm gluing it with matte accents from Ranger, and I've been informed that they're no longer in production, and that makes me very sad. Adding my date stamp. And then I decided to go around and add a bit of a darker edge, just like I would with Distress ink, but I'm doing it with my Inktense block that I'm diluting in some water, as you can see. Once I cut my spread in two to place it in my journal, I decided that the button wasn't what I could use for this spread. So I changed my mind. And I went for a Stampatique stamp that I had already colorized. This is the medium B. And I'm going to place it on a piece of paper that I prepared stamping on it in the same way that I did for the background. And then I'm adding my blended color that I made for the first layer. Now, as I don't like to cut around legs and tiny little details, I cut them off. I stamp my complete image in the background and then glue my trimmed image on top of it so that I don't have any details missing. And to blend both images together, I add some black soot Distress ink on my trimmed image. This is just some glimmer glaze to make my image pop, and then I can put it in place. I also decided to add some numbers on the first one. Don't ask me why it's 4 and a 7. Those were the two first that I got my hands on. And again, using a brad to keep them in place. Jane asked me if I like this kind of journal better than the previous one, than the Coptic binded. I must say that sometimes I do miss my Coptic binded journals, and then I think, well, let's do a spread in those. But when I think of all the embellishments that I can put in this kind of journal with a binding ring in the middle, well, this is the one I grabbed because I want to be able to put all these kinds of embellishments on my spread. Here I'm just adding 2 eeny-meeny tiny words from a dictionary, and that's the last detail for this spread. Wishing you all a fabulous Christmas, and don't forget to cast your vote. See you back next time. Ta-da!